Hi, this is Kevin, and welcome to my tutorial for Python program designed for Jupyter notebooks. Um, so, in this tutorial, we're going to be looking at the differences in the way that you would design a Python program that would just normally run at the command line. In my class, when we run our programs, we run them inside of PyCharm, and when we do that, they pop up in a little window, little panel at the bottom of PyCharm. But that's really a simulation of um, the console, right? The command line environment. And so we've been designing and writing and testing our programs in this kind of command line mode all along. Now, what if we want to write a program that we can call from inside of a Jupyter notebook? How might that design be different? Okay, and that's what we're going to go over here. So, uh, let's look at some of the characteristics of Python programs that are designed for the command line. And then we'll talk about the characteristics, how they might be different if we design the program to be called from a Jupyter notebook. And then we'll actually go and look at those kind of programs and play with them a bit. Okay, so Python programs that are designed to be run at the command line, they often print a welcome message as they start. We have a bunch of lines of text that are appearing at the command line. And sometimes, when you look at the command line history, it's hard to figure out what ran when. So one trick that designers use is that they'll have a message that says, just have the name of the program or the intent of the program or welcome to such and such. Then typically, if there are some choices for the user to make, the program will prompt at the console for the user to make the choices. Okay, and the things that we typically do in my class, sometimes we might ask the user for the name of the data directory, and for one or more names of input files, right? And then we run the program. We do not need a function included in the program that is designed to be just right to be called from a Jupyter notebook, because for the things that we've been doing, we have no intention to call parts of that code from a Jupyter notebook. Okay? And when we go to run the program, we typically, at the very bottom, we have a call to main. And how do we do it? Well, we just call main paren, and it runs. Okay, and that's been working fine in our course up until now. And it will work fine if you don't want to create some code that can be called from a Jupyter notebook. Okay, how might things be different if we were designing and implementing a program that we wanted to be able to call some important part of it from a Jupyter notebook? Well, here's how it would be different. Okay, it's not so important to print a welcome message because it's a little more obvious from within the notebook what we're calling. We probably have a markdown cell that says, now we're configuring and running the such and such program. So does the program really have to repeat that? No, not really. It could. Okay. It's never going to prompt the user for choices. Why is this? Well, it's the nature of Jupyter notebooks that one of the one of the values that they produce is that they produce explicit documentation for whatever the workflow is. So we don't want to prompt the user at the console to, for instance, enter the name of the data directory or enter the name of one or more of the input files, because it won't be documented in what we leave behind. Okay, what goes on at the console. Um, so there'll still be, you can still prompt the user, to input things, but you won't leave a record. So we never do that because we want to leave a record. One of the major use cases for Jupyter notebooks is we want to document the workflow of what we're doing to make it reproducible for us and reproducible for whoever we share it with. That might be our collaborators. That could be people who are trying to reproduce the research that we're trying to do. So what do we do instead of prompting? Because some choices have to be made. Okay. Well, we have a code cell in the Jupyter notebook. Okay, and we code these values as assignments to variable names. Okay, so if we were going to prompt the user for the name of the data directory, well, then we would code something like data directory name gets assigned the value data, and input file name gets assigned the value my records .text. Okay, and then we pass these parameters when we call the function. Okay, and we'll see how that happens. Okay, we always are going to design a function specifically for calling from the Jupyter notebook, and that's not going to be main. Okay. In the file that holds all of our code, right, in our Python file, when we go to unit test it, for instance, we're going to have to call main. Okay, and we're going to do that by not just simply having a call to main, but we're going to check if dunder name equal dunder main, and if it is, we're going to call main, which is, it's going to turn out to say, if we're running a unit test of the program, then call main. Okay, and you'll see the details in just a minute. Okay, so those are the differences. Let's go experience them. All right, so I have a project here that's called Demonstrations for Jupyter Notebook Unit, and you probably ought to be able to find that in the other resources download for the week that you're working on right now. Okay. And so let's look at what we need in this. Well, like any other project in my class, it's going to have a data subdirectory. Does everybody do that? No, that's a convention that we use in my class. And we're going to bring over, I have an already coded version of this, or as I sometimes say, already baked version. And I'm going to paste in the data files. Okay. And here they are. And one is called empty file.txt. And you've probably seen that before in a prior week of the course. It's just an empty text file. And the other one is called slot values .text, and you've seen that one before. And we've used it several times for several exercises, right? So as a demonstration, I've created a very simple program that reads slot value .text, and I'm going to paste this in here. It's called purple counter. And what does it do? Well, it goes through slot values .text. It goes through whatever the input file is, and it counts the number of lines that include purple with a capital P. Okay, so line 1 would count. Line 2 would count. Line 3 would not. It doesn't have purple, and that's how that would go. Okay, so let's look at purple counter .py. It's a pretty typical design for a program. It's not doing a whole lot. It's just finding the right file. It's opening it. It's doing a for in to read the file, and it's counting the lines that include a purple value. Okay, so I decided I would show us printing a welcome to purple counter. Okay, and then the choices that have to be made. In a lot of the cases in my course, we've sort of hard-coded the name of the data directory. In this case, I decided that we would prompt the user for it. So please enter the directory name. Please enter the input file name. So we prompt for those two. And then we combine them to make the file path a name. And then we do an open. And then we initialize the purple count to 0, and then we go through and we say for line and in file, we split lines, so we get a list of individual values, that's called slot of values, and then we say if purple with a capital P is in slot values, well then increment the purple count. And then we're done, so we close the input file and then we print the message. There were purple count records in the input file that included the color purple. Okay, so, and as usual, when we go to unit test a program like this, we want to make sure that it works with the real input file, which in this case is going to be slot values.text, and we want to make sure it works with an empty input file, empty file.text. So let's run with both. So we're going to say run purple counter. It welcomes us. It asks for the directory name, data. Okay, and now we'll give it the real data file, slot values.text. And it says there are 3,015 records in the input file that included the color purple. Okay, pretty simple, just the kind of design and architecture that we've been used to so far in the course. And then just to make sure that this is a robust design that will work with an empty input file, we'll do it again. So the directory is data, and then we'll say empty file.text. And it says there were 0 records in the input file that included the color purple. Okay, so pretty typical stuff that we're used to, right? So let's go back and compare that to the notes that we had for what the design would be for a typical a program that is designed for the command line. We often print a welcome message. I don't always do that, but I showed how we do it there. Then we prompt for user choices. at the command line. In this case, we've done the data directory name, and we only have one input file, so the input file name. We do not need to include a function that's designed to be called from a Jupyter notebook. So if you look here, this only has a single function. It only has main. Okay. All right. And then the last thing is that we can invoke the main method simply by calling main. And that's what this does here. It's a plain call to main, right? Now, this just having a call to main works fine as long as you don't want to import this file, purple counter.py, and then import one of the methods, right? And then in this case, it would be a function, not a method, right? A method is a function that's in a Python class, okay? So if we just have a call to main, if another program were to import this, it would run the main automatically. Okay, and that's okay because we didn't really design this to be imported and have some part of it called from someplace else. Okay, so this is just the code that we want. All right, now how might this code be different if we were going to design it to be called from a Jupyter notebook? Okay. So let's take a purple counter, all right, and let's copy it. Where's my copy? My copy's up here, and I want to paste it in, and I want to call this one purple counter refactored. Okay, and this is refactored such that it's usable by a usable to be called from a Jupyter notebook. It still does the same work, so I think it's okay to call it a refactoring, but it's more what we're going to have left when we're done is more reusable than what we start with. Okay, so let's look at the list of things that I said were different, okay? Sometimes print a welcome message. I'm going to leave that out, okay? I'm not going to prompt the user for choices. Instead, I'm going to make assignments to variables, okay? And then I'm going to pass them to the function that gets called from the notebook. All right, let's look. So the major architectural change here is that there's a function to be called from the notebook. All right, now what would that include? Well, we want to print the answer. We want to process the file. We want to initialize the purple count. We'll want to open the file. We'll want to combine the directory name and the file name. Are we going to want to prompt for these things? No. Okay, good. We have identified everything that's going to go in our new method. Okay, so let's right click, choose refactor, extract method. Now, is it really a method? No, it's really a function because it's not in a Python class, but these features in IDEs like PyCharm for refactoring, usually they call this refactoring function extract method, and so that's why they called it that. So what are we going to call that? My convention not everybody uses this, but I think it's a good one. So that's what I'd like you to do for our course, is we just take the overall program name. With the real program name is really Purple Counter. Ours, the one that we're in now, is called Purple Counter Refactored, and that's because we've got two versions. Okay, but I'm going to call this do underscore Purple Counter. Okay, so the idea here is that you take the name of the overall program and you just sort of prepend a do to it, and that's the signal that this is the function that does the work of the program that can be called from another program. In this case, the notebook. Okay, and it says it's going to pass in the data directory name and the in file name. That looks good. Let's click OK. And here it is. So now we have a new function, do Purple Counter. It gets the data directory name and the in file name as parameters. Okay, and then we've got all the rest of the code to make that work. Okay, this would be a nice time to test. The point of refactoring is to improve the readability, the testability, the maintainability, and probably the reusability without changing the functionality. Okay, so this should do the same thing that the last one did. Let's take a look. So it says, work on the Purple Counter. It wants the directory name. I'm going to say data. The file name, I'm going to say slot values dot text, and it tells me that there are 3015 records with purple. Okay, I think that's great. All right, are we done? No, we're not done. I'll tell you why. There may be some people who kind of want to have their cake and eat it too, which is they want to create a program that they can run from the command line, okay? And they would also like to be able to call a function within that program, like the do function, that does the bulk of the work, right? So they want two versions, right? If you wanted to do that, you could probably stop here, I guess. You still have one problem though. And that's the problem that when you import this, it is going to run main. So when you import it, it's going to run. That's not the behavior that you want to use. So instead of that, what we're going to do is I'm going to copy over from my already coded version this other version of how to call main. Okay, and you'll see in a lot of textbooks that this is the only version that they show you. All right, so even in the Zell textbook, which we use in my class, after he shows you how to do this conditional call to main, I think he uses it for the rest of the book, and one could do that. You know, it doesn't hurt to do that. But what I like to do is to, if I look at the original Purple Counter, if I don't have any intention of importing the program, I just use a simple call to main. And if I do have the intention that this is going to be imported, then I've got the more sophisticated version. Okay, so let's run this again. Okay, that's not what I was expecting. Oh, I pasted it again. That definitely was not what I wanted. Okay, let's run this again. All right. And I'm going to say the data directory and slot values dot text. Okay, and that looks good, right? So if you wanted to have a program that you could run at the command line and it would do a very user-friendly thing at the command line, and you wanted to, or you wanted to call um, uh, the main processing from a Jupyter notebook after having configured the Jupyter notebook um, the right way, well, this would do it. Oh, okay. I don't get too many situations in which I'm trying to create a program that can work both ways. Typically, I'm either building something that's going to be run from the notebook or not. Okay, so for my class, here's what I recommend that you do, and I would prefer that you do, which is I prefer that you don't really need the welcome. So we'll get rid of that. Okay. And we're not going to um, prompt the user. We're just going to hard code this in here. And we're not going to prompt the user again for the file name because we're going to just hard code this in here. Slot values dot text. And in this version, okay, the main is just a holding fixture to unit test do purple counter. That's all it really does. Oh, okay. Would you run this on its own? No, probably not. It always runs with the same data. Okay. But it's a perfectly good unit test, right? So here's what we're going to do. So one of the things I want to unit test is this going to work when I call it in the input file is slot values dot text. Okay, I've got that. Let's run it. And it ran 3015. And if I want a unit test where it does empty file dot text, well, I simply change the main. Again, this is just a unit testing fixture. Okay. If I'm going to do 2 unit tests, can I change the value up here? Sure, I can. Okay, and now I'm going to run it again. And it's going to say 0. Okay, and maybe I would like to leave it with slot values.text. Maybe I'd like to do that. So maybe I'll change it. I'll run it one more time. And I consider this to be unit tested. Okay. Now there's only one thing we've not unit tested. Okay. That's the issue of if I import this into another program, will it run on import? Or will it recognize that it's been imported and not run? Now we could try some way to unit test it, but typically when we're writing this kind of program, we're also creating the notebook, right? So let's create the notebook, all right? And let's unit test that. And then when we do that, when we show that it doesn't run on import, then this program, this purple counter refactored, it'll then be fully unit tested. Okay, so how do I create a notebook? Well, one of the things I haven't emphasized so far is when I created the project, I used a virtual environment that included Python 3.10 and Jupyter. Okay. Now, I'm recording this. We're going to use it in the summer of 2022, and we're not using Python 3.10 yet. We're only using Python 3.9. So if it's the summer of 2022 and you want to use Python 3.9, be my guest. Okay. Um, uh, if this is a year later and we're using Python 3.11, well, use Python 3.11. But we want the version of Python that we want and Jupyter notebooks. Okay. All right, so let's create a new notebook file. So right click, new, Jupyter notebook. Now, if I haven't included the Jupyter packages in my virtual environment, when I do this drop down, I'm not going to see this Jupyter notebook option. So if you're trying to follow along and you go, oh, Kevin, I don't have a Jupyter notebook option, well, then you need to go back and get the Jupyter packages included in the virtual environment that you're using. Okay, so new Jupyter notebook, and I'm going to call this Purple Counter Notebook. Okay, all right. And this thing about version control is something that I get that you probably won't get. Okay, so let's look at Purple Counter Notebook. Okay, so as I hope you already know from other tutorials, each cell in a notebook is either a code cell, which in our class, in our case, will include Python 3 code, or where's the drop down? It's a markdown cell, or we have this raw NB convert, which is not something that we use. Okay, so our first thing is going to be a markdown cell. Okay, and the markdown is just going to have the title. So we're going to have a single pound sign, a space, and then we're just going to say purple counter notebook. Okay. All right. Now, how do we get this to turn into something that looks like the HTML that it's supposed to generate? Well, Shift Enter. Okay, that looks like an H1. That's what it's supposed to be. Okay, so now we need more, another markdown cell. Okay, and we want an H2 that's 2 pound signs, a space, and let's say requirements. Requirements. Okay, and then we just have some regular type. So this notebook requires a virtual environment that includes packages for, I'm going to say Python 3.10. You use the Python that you're using in the current semester and Jupyter. Okay. And then I'm going to have another line and say this notebook is included in a PyCharm project. PyCharm with the capital C. It makes use of Python code from within the PyCharm project directory. Okay, and this requirements typically tells the user of the notebook. I guess we didn't want code, so we'll get rid of one of those codes. It tells the user of the notebook um, about the environmental requirements that are needed to run the notebook. And again, I'm going to do a shift enter, and it's going to turn it into um, uh, well, it's going to turn its appearance into HTML. And now the only thing that we're going to do in the Purple Counter notebook is we're going to run the Purple Counter program from the notebook. So we're going to have another markdown cell, okay, in which we're going to say, let's make this a level 2 title, and let's just say Purple Counter, okay. And then underneath, let's have another smaller title, put 3 pound signs. That'll give us an H3. And we're just going to say configure and run. Okay. So that's what we're going to do. And then we're going to do shift enter. Okay. Now, there are times in notebooks, and I deal with this in other tutorials, where maybe we want to do some configuration, and then we want to run, and then run, and then run, and run. Maybe there's overall configuration for a group of 3 or 4 runs, and then there's the configure for just one run, and then so we do a configure and run, and I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities. This is pretty simple. We just have to configure this and run it. Okay, so now we finally get down to code cell. So this only has one code cell. Okay, and I'm going to bring over all of the code right here. And I just want to point out that this code, the configuration, okay, the choices, the things that we're choosing, we're just going to assign to variable names, okay? And then when we call the function, we call do purple counter, we're going to pass those variable names as parameters, okay? I just want to point out, if you go back to Purple Counter Refactored, isn't that what we did in main? We assigned a variable, and then we called the do function, passing the variables. Now, how's this different in the notebook? Well, we needed to do an import. Okay, so it's pretty easy to import from within your own project. You just say from program name, so from Purple Counter Refactored, import, and then whatever you're going to call, do Purple Counter, and that's it. So how do we run this cell? We do another shift enter. Okay, and we'll see a couple of things happened. One is it ran the program, it called the function, and now we see the output. Okay, and now you can kind of see why that message, that kind of very polite kind of greeting that we decided to leave out, why we don't really need it, because we can see the output and we see it's right under this configure and run, and we've got some markdown up here that says what all this is. So, do we really need the program to put to put out yet another greeting? I'm going to suggest that we don't really need it. Would it hurt? No, I don't think it would hurt. So that's what happened there. The other thing that popped up down at the bottom here was a link to the browser that got opened. I've been kind of working in this internal PyCharm Jupyter notebook environment. And typically I don't like to work here, but I've decided that I can tolerate it. And so instead of that, if I go down here, it says Jupyter server started at, and it has a URL. If I just click on that URL, oh, then it says open in browser. So maybe that's what we want. The link open in browser. Did that open it? While there'd be a slight pause, I figure out why it's not opening. It should open momentarily. I'll be right back. Okay, I found it. So it turned out that when I clicked down at the bottom, it popped up this panel over here, and there's an open in browser link right here. So I'm going to click on that, and then it opens my browser. Okay, and you can see I've got purple counter notebook, and I open it up, and here's a pretty version of it. Right? And this is it. That's all there really is to it. Now, I've got other tutorials for exercise assignments and introduction to notebooks and all that kind of stuff, but none of them really get so explicitly at the issue of how the program design of the Python program is different when you want to call the majority of the functionality from a Jupyter notebook. Now, as you can see, this is run only one time, right? Okay. Let's see what would happen if we forgot. Okay. Let's go back to Purple Counter Refactored. Okay. And let's go back and forget to have this fancy version of the call to main. Let's just have the plain old one that we do when we're not trying to import something. Okay. And let's do this. Okay. Now we need 2 blank lines before it. Okay. That's good. All right. So how would it run when we ran the unit test when we're testing it just by itself? Well, it's going to run fine. Okay, so let's say we want to run it. And let's look at the results. It's fine. So you can't really detect a mistake here. Where will you find the mistake? You'll find, hang on. Excuse me. You'll find the mistake when you're over in the notebook. Because here we're importing it and we're running it. And now we're going to find this runs 2 times. So I'm going to do a Shift Enter. And, oh, now this is interesting. When you're in the notebook, and you'll know this from my other tutorials, once you do an import, okay, if you go back and change the code of what you imported, okay, you won't get the changes. They won't take effect if you just run the cell again. You have to go up and you have to go, you have to pick in the menu, you would pick kernel. Let's do a restart and run all. So restart and run all. You can see that the program ran twice. It ran once when we imported it, which we didn't want, and then it ran when we explicitly called it. Oh, Well, we've made a mistake in our program. We have the wrong kind of code here. Okay, and I'm just going to do an undo. Okay, so now we've got the right kind of code here, right? So let's just do a unit test again to make sure that runs okay. And that runs okay. And let's come back to the notebook. All right, and again, if all we do is to rerun the cell, we're going to get the same answer that we got the last time. Okay, oh, here's the cell here. So, well, that didn't work. Somehow that got fixed. I don't know. To be sure, when you want to know that you have the right version, come up here, the kernel, you can just restart, and clear output, restart and run all, restart and run all will do what we want here, and we can see it's just running one time. Okay, so let's just review the differences, right? So if we're just doing what we've been doing all along in the course before we got to Jupyter notebooks, and we're creating a pretty simple Python program that's going to be run from the command line and not from a Jupyter notebook. It's not going to be called from a Jupyter notebook. Well, the things that are consistent with usability would be we often want to print some kind of a welcome message so you can tell the program's running. Okay. We are going to prompt the user at the command line to make their choices. Okay. Stuff like the data directory name and the input file name or names. Okay. We don't need to do anything within the program to create a callable function that can be called from the Jupyter notebook. If we have a small program, then all of our code might be in main, which I showed you here. And then at the bottom of the program, when we want to call main, we can simply call main. By contrast, if we're going to design a program to be called from a Jupyter notebook, the value of printing a welcome message is a lot lower, probably not worth the time. You never want to prompt the user for choices because even though they will run in the Jupyter notebook and the user can answer the questions, that the values are not saved anywhere. And a major part of what Jupyter notebooks are about is documenting the workflow explicitly. What programs were run with what files in order to create what output. And we're going to share that notebook with collaborators and reviewers and people who want to reproduce the research that we've done. So we need to show everything. We need to show our work. So this prompting the user is not going to show our work. Instead, we're going to put the choosable values in by coding them explicitly into variable assignments in the notebook. And then we're going to pass those variables as the parameters when we call the Python function. In order to have a Python function to call, we're going to create a function that is probably not going to be main. Okay. And what I would like you to do is just to take the name of the program, in this case, purple counter, and prepend the word do. So that function becomes do purple counter. Okay. And so when we call do purple counter, well, we're passing the variables that have our choices. Okay. And and they're going to be well documented in the notebook. And then the last thing that we have to remember is having the more sophisticated call to main such that the the program is so that main is not going to run when this code is imported. Okay, and so as a result, okay, this is the code that you're left with. Just this. So this is the configuration where we set the values for the variables. Okay, then we have an import. You only have to import it the first time you're going to use it. So if your workflow has you running this, say, 3 consecutive times with different input files and creating different output files, well, you only have to import it the first time, okay? And then you just have the call, and when you execute it, it runs. There you go. So that's it for this tutorial. I'm going to say bye until next time. Bye-bye.